Yep, the 80s are officially dead. Yes, forgive me, I'm wearing a flannel because we're going to be talking about grunge bands. I'm an idiot, sorry. Where to start with this episode? Let's just talk about the year 1991. Let's talk about some of the albums that were released in that year. It was an insane year of music. Metallica, Black Album. Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden. Pearl Jam 10. On the heavier side, Sepultura, Arise. So it was just an incredible year of music. But one album stands out among all those other ones, I think. And that is Nirvana, Nevermind. An album that seemingly changed everything. It was a cultural earthquake. Do you remember where you were the first time you heard Teen Spirit? When you heard that snare? Or really the first time that you saw Smells Like Teen Spirit on MTV. I think that's where the journey begins for most of us when it comes to Nirvana, or a lot of us. It was a mixture of punk, metal, and really just rock and roll. Just really well-written rock songs. If you know anything about Kurt Cobain, you know that he loved the Beatles. He loved well-written songs. He loved pop songs, but he also liked Black Sabbath. He liked heavier stuff too. So Nirvana was a perfect mixture of pop hooks, punk attitude, metal thrown in there too for the heaviness. You could have a haunting, dirgy song like Come As You Are. Come as you are, as you were, as I want. And then you could have a song like Breed, one of my personal favorite Nirvana songs, which is just like an all-out assault on the senses. But the point being, they're both really catchy, well-written songs. So because Nirvana knew how to write catchy, heavy songs, they were able to bridge this gap between the pop bands that we all were listening to and loved, and then they brought in this new breed of pop. I mean, Nirvana might be the heaviest pop band of all time. For context, let's go back to 1992. Nirvana Nevermind dethrones the king of pop, Michael Jackson, from the Billboard #1 spot. That in and of itself is absolutely crazy. Especially back then. That was nuts. But also, let's take a look at some of the other bands that were on Billboard at the time. So you're talking about Color Me Bad, Boyz II Men, Garth Brooks, Elton John and George Michael, MC Hammer. Now, whatever you think of these bands or these performers, that's not the point. The point is, they don't sound anything like Nirvana. That's what I mean by a cultural earthquake. It was like this massive shift in sound and image. It wasn't just what the band sounded like, it was the image that they portrayed. They were anti-image, anti-fashion, right? But then, ironically, that became the fashion. You know, everybody got a flannel the next couple of years for Christmas. You see what I'm saying? The Seattle sound is taking over. After Nirvana hits #1, all these other bands from Seattle start to get really noticed. Okay, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, all their albums start to climb the charts as well. Now, this isn't completely unheard of, right? The music industry focusing in on one area or one town. Just one example, a few years earlier than this, was the Sunset Strip bands. So after Quiet Riot got signed, and they got a #1 single, then all these other bands started to get signed, and the music industry focused all their energy in that one spot. Now, what's different about Seattle versus the Sunset Strip bands is at least glam and hair metal, again, as I mentioned in a previous video, it made sense with pop music. Okay, this was like pop metal, but Soundgarden wasn't Poison. Okay, Alice in Chains wasn't Rat. Pearl Jam wasn't Stryper. Think about it like this. Metallica originally came from the Bay Area thrash metal scene. So in 1988, when they released And Justice for All, and they hit the Billboard charts, they were like #6, which was very impressive for a thrash metal band. But just imagine if after that, Exodus, Testament, Death Angel, and Possessed were also on the Billboard top 10, or even the top 20. That did not happen. Now, I understand that the Seattle bands are much more relatable and listenable than thrash metal. especially Bay Area thrash metal back then. But I still think there's some commonality there, because when people first started hearing Nirvana and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, that stuff was really heavy and dark, and it was so much different than whatever else was on like the Billboard charts at the time. So personally, why does Nirvana matter to me? Looking back, I'm 12 years old. I'm watching this Smells Like Teen Spirit video. I've never been to a punk or hardcore show before I watched that. But I think that video specifically helped prepare me for what I was going to walk into years later. It helped me visualize kind of what that was going to look like. Oh, this is what I can expect if I go to those kind of shows. Because when you look at the Teen Spirit video, especially when they get crazy and all the kids start moshing and, you know, stage diving and whatever else, it looks like hundreds of shows that I've been to myself, but I hadn't done that before. So I think Nirvana and that video specifically were formative in a big way, for sure. What else about Nirvana? I think they ushered in an era of cynicism and distrust, but not just a distrust of institutions and all the normal things we like to rebel against, but they had a distrust of rock stars and pop stars. In fact, they were kind of anti-rock stars who became rock stars. Their anti-fashion became the fashion, and that was something new. That was something really weird. So did they usher this in, or did they just kind of perfectly represent where we were as a country back then, especially young people? What do you think? I feel like I need to do a couple documentary shout outs. There is a series of videos called Classic Albums, and they did an episode on Nirvana Nevermind. I highly recommend everybody go watch that. It's really fascinating to go track by track and see how they recorded them and what's the story behind every song. It's really great. Another film I would recommend is called Hype. And this film had a massive impact on me. In fact, it was the biggest inspiration for me to create my own documentary called The Cog, which is about a DIY punk club in Omaha, Nebraska that I frequented a lot, and I played a lot of shows there with my band System Failure. And Hype is not just my favorite documentary about music, it is probably my favorite documentary of all time. I think it captured perfectly that scene back then, that era, the feel of what was going on back then in the late 80s into the 90s, and then what happened once Nirvana happened. So if you're looking for something to watch, I recommend those two documentaries. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for commenting. Please continue to do so, and I'll see you next time.